the human warship that defied every Crimson and Nova Judge. Captain Mark Reynolds stood on the bridge of the HSS Defiance, his eyes fixed on the main screen. The stars seemed colder today. He ran a hand through his graying hair and took a deep breath. "Status report," he said, his voice steady despite the weight pressing down on his shoulders. "All systems operational, Captain," replied First Officer Anna Hayes from her station, "but we're still running on backup power for the rear shields." The Defiance wasn't much to look at. A mid-class destroyer with more patches than original hull plating. 10 years ago, it would have been sent to the scrapyard. Now it was humanity's last real warship. The door to the bridge slid open and Lieutenant Tom Parker rushed in, his uniform wrinkled and his eyes bright with excitement. "Captain, I've done it." Parker held up a data chip like it was made of gold. "The targeting system modifications, they're ready." Reynolds nodded but didn't smile. Parker's modifications weren't approved by Fleet Command. They weren't even legal under military regulations. But legal didn't matter much anymore. Not when humanity was losing the war so badly. "Will they work?" Reynolds asked. Parker's smile faltered. "They might, they should. I've pushed the predictive algorithms beyond safety limits, but if we can shave even half a second off our firing response." "Half a second won't save us against a Nova Judge," Hayes said, not looking up from her station. The Nova Judges. Reynolds suppressed a shiver. The artificial intelligences that commanded the Crimson Imperium's massive warships had never lost a battle. They calculated, judged, and executed with perfect precision. One by one, human colonies had fallen to them. One by one, the judges had determined that humans were unworthy of continued existence in the galaxy. "Get those modifications installed," Reynolds told Parker. "I want them tested before we reach the jump point." "Yes, sir." Parker hurried away, nearly colliding with engineer Kate Wilson as she entered the bridge. Wilson's hands were stained with engine grease and dark circles hung under her eyes. "Captain, we need to talk about the reactor." Reynolds gestured to his ready room and they stepped inside. Once the door closed, Wilson's professional demeanor cracked. "I can't keep pushing it like this," she said. "The coolant system is barely holding together if we make another emergency jump." "Can we make it to the Orion sector?" Reynolds asked. Wilson hesitated. "Yes, probably, but after that I can't promise anything." "After that might not matter," Reynolds said quietly. Wilson stared at him. "The reports are that bad." Worse, he activated a small holographic display on his desk. A tactical map showed the collapse of humanity's defensive line in the Orion sector. Red markers, crimson ships, swarming like angry insects around the failing blue dots of human forces. "They've broken through our last major defense line. New Terra is exposed," Reynolds said, zooming in on a small blue-green planet surrounded by defensive stations. 8 million civilians. The evacuation has started, but they need time." Wilson understood immediately, and we're going to give them that time. It wasn't a question. Orders came in an hour ago. The Defiance is to engage the Crimson forces advancing toward New Terra and delay them by any means necessary. "That's suicide," Wilson said flatly. Reynolds didn't disagree. "Get me everything you can from that reactor. We'll need it all." When Reynolds returned to the bridge, he found communications specialist Jack Reed hunched over his console, his headphones pressed tightly against his head. "Something interesting?" Reynolds asked. Reed jumped slightly. "Sir, yes, I think so. I've been monitoring Crimson transmissions. I think I found a pattern in their encryption." Reynolds raised an eyebrow. Crimson communications were supposed to be unbreakable. "What kind of pattern?" "It's in their shield rotations," Reed explained as he pulled up a series of waveforms on his screen. "They cycle at specific intervals that match their communication pulses. If we could predict when those cycles happen." "We might find a vulnerability," Reynolds finished. "Work with Parker. His targeting modifications might be able to exploit this." Reed nodded eagerly and hurried off the bridge. Reynolds settled into his command chair and studied the tactical display. The mission was impossible. The Defiance against 3 Crimson dreadnoughts, each commanded by a Nova Judge. The math was simple and brutal. They were going to die. "Captain," Hayes said softly from beside him, "the crew should know." Reynolds nodded. He pressed a button on his chair, activating the ship-wide communication system. "This is Captain Reynolds speaking." He paused, searching for the right words. "In 6 hours, we will arrive at New Terra. Our mission is to engage the Crimson forces advancing on the colony and delay them long enough for civilian evacuation ships to escape." Another pause. The entire ship seemed to hold its breath. "I won't lie to you. The odds are against us. We face 3 Nova judges. No human ship has ever defeated even one. But every civilian ship that escapes carries the future of our species. Today, the Defiance will live up to its name." Reynolds signed off. The hours passed quickly. The ship hummed with activity as the crew prepared for battle. Parker installed his targeting modifications, Reed fine-tuned his communication interceptors, and Wilson pushed the reactor to its limits, squeezing out every bit of power she could. When they reached the jump point, Reynolds gave the order. The Defiance leaped into faster-than-light travel. The stars stretched into lines around them. "Why us?" Hayes asked quietly as they stood watching the swirl of hyperspace through the viewport. "Why send the Defiance? We're not the biggest ship, not the newest." "I've been asking myself the same question," Reynolds admitted. The ship's doctor, Lisa Cooper, joined them by the viewport. "I might have an answer to that," she said. "I've been reviewing the crew assignments. It's not random." "What do you mean?" Reynolds asked, turning to face her. "Parker's targeting systems, Reed's decryption abilities, Wilson's reactor modifications, my advanced microbiology research." Cooper looked between them. "None of us should be on the same ship. We all have specialized knowledge that Fleet Command has been concerned about." "Concerned?" Hayes frowned. "Too experimental, too dangerous," Cooper smiled grimly. "Too desperate," Reynolds understood. "They put us all on the Defiance because we're their last best hope, and if we fail, they lose nothing they weren't prepared to lose already." Cooper finished. "Well," Reynolds said finally, "let's make sure we don't fail." The Defiance dropped out of hyperspace near New Terra. Immediately, alarms blared across the bridge. 3 Crimson dreadnoughts detected, Hayes called out. "They're already engaging the orbital defenses." On the main screen, 3 massive warships hung in space. Each was 5 times the size of the Defiance, their hulls gleaming with the red markings of the Crimson Imperium. "Incoming transmission," Reed announced as the screen flickered, showing 3 identical humanoid figures. Their features were perfectly symmetrical, beautiful. Their eyes glowed with an inner light. "The Nova judges." "Human vessel," they spoke in perfect unison. "You have been judged and found wanting. Surrender and accept subjugation or face immediate destruction." Reynolds met their gaze without flinching. "This is Captain Mark Reynolds of the HSS Defiance," he replied, "and we respectfully decline your judgment." The battle was about to begin. "Shields at maximum," Captain Reynolds ordered. As the first energy blasts from the Crimson dreadnoughts streaked toward them, the Defiance shuddered as the impact spread across their shields. On the main screen, the 3 massive enemy vessels moved into attack formation, their weapons glowing with deadly energy. "Return fire," Reynolds commanded. The Defiance's guns roared to life, but the energy beams dissipated harmlessly against the dreadnought's powerful shields. "No effect, Captain," Hayes reported, her voice tense. Reynolds tightened his grip on the arms of his command chair. "Parker, how's that targeting system coming?" "Almost there," Parker's voice came through the comm. "I need 2 more minutes." "We might not have 2 minutes," Hayes muttered as another barrage hit the Defiance, making the lights flicker. "Shields down to 68%, the tactical officer announced. On the screen, evacuation ships began launching from New Terra's surface. Small, vulnerable transports filled with civilians. The Crimson dreadnoughts immediately shifted some of their weapons toward these easy targets. "No," Reynolds said quietly, then louder. "All power to engines. Put us between those dreadnoughts and the evacuation ships." Wilson's voice cut in from engineering. "Captain, if we divert power to engines, our shields will." "Wilson!" The Defiance lurched forward, accelerating toward the massive enemy ships. The crew braced themselves as the ship positioned itself directly in the line of fire, drawing all enemy attacks away from the civilian vessels. "The Nova judges are hailing us again," Reed reported. "On screen," Reynolds ordered. The 3 perfect faces of the Nova judges appeared, their expressions unchanged. Your actions are irrational, they said in unison. You cannot win, your destruction is certain. Why do you persist? Reynolds smiled thinly, because that's what humans do. He cut the transmission just as Parker burst onto the bridge, his face flushed with excitement. It's ready, Captain, and Reed's signal analysis was right. There's a pattern in their shield rotations, a vulnerability. Reynolds leaned forward. Explain. Parker quickly brought up a diagram on the main tactical display. Their shields cycle every 4.2 seconds, creating a millisecond gap at these 3 points, he said, pointing to specific locations on the dreadnoughts. If we time our shots precisely, we might get through. But we'd need to get much closer, Parker added, and we'd need to hit all 3 weak points simultaneously. Reynolds considered their options as another blast rocked the ship. Shields at 41%, the tactical officer reported grimly. I've made my decision, Reynolds said. Wilson, I need everything you've got in the reactor. Maximum power to engines, then shift to weapons on my mark. Captain, that'll burn out half our systems. Then we'll fight with the other half, Wilson replied firmly. Reed, can you disrupt their communications even for a few seconds? Reynolds asked. Reed nodded. I think so. I can use their own ion patterns to create feedback. Do it, Hayes. Plot an attack vector that brings us within minimum range of the lead dreadnought. Hayes stared at him. Sir, minimum range puts us directly in the path of their main cannons. Exactly. They won't expect it because it's irrational, Reynolds said, his eyes never leaving the enemy ships on the screen. And that's our advantage. The bridge crew moved with focused intensity, preparing for what might be their final attack. The Defiance trembled as Wilson pushed the reactor beyond all safety limits. Warnings blared from multiple stations, but no one paid them any attention. Reed status, Reynolds asked. Disruption signal ready, Reed replied. Parker. Targeting solutions locked in. We'll only get one shot at this. Reynolds took a deep breath. All hands brace for high-speed maneuver. Wilson, give me everything now. The Defiance shot forward, engines screaming in protest. The ship accelerated to attack speed, hurtling directly toward the largest Crimson dreadnought. They're powering up their main cannons, Hayes warned. Now Reed, Reynolds ordered. Reed activated his disruption signal. For a critical moment, the perfect coordination between the 3 Nova judges faltered as their communication network experienced unexpected feedback. Their shields are cycling, Parker shouted. 3, 2, 1, mark. Fire all weapons, Reynolds commanded. The Defiance unleashed everything it had, enhanced by Parker's modifications, and perfectly timed to hit during the millisecond vulnerability. The energy beam struck the lead dreadnought at its weakest point. For a moment, nothing happened. Then explosions blossomed on the massive ship's hull as internal systems cascaded into critical failure. Direct hit, Parker exulted. Don't celebrate yet, Reynolds cautioned. Hard to port, target the second dreadnought. The Defiance swung around, narrowly avoiding the now erratic fire from the damaged lead ship. The other 2 dreadnoughts adjusted their attack patterns, but the brief communication disruption had created confusion in their coordinated assault. Second target locked, Parker announced. Fire when ready. Again, the Defiance's weapons found their mark during a brief shield vulnerability. The second dreadnought's engines exploded, sending it spinning out of control. But the victory came at a cost. The third dreadnought caught the Defiance with a glancing blow from its main cannon. The impact sent crew members flying across the bridge as systems shorted out in cascades of sparks. Damage report, Reynolds shouted over the blaring alarms. Shields gone, hull breaches on decks 3 through 7. Weapon systems at 30%, Hayes called back, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. The tactical display showed the third dreadnought circling for a killing blow. At the same time, more evacuation ships streamed away from New Terra, using the battle as cover for their escape. Reynolds watched the civilian ships with grim satisfaction. Then he turned to what remained of his bridge crew. We've hurt them, we've proven they can be defeated, but we're not done yet. He switched to shipwide communication. All hands prepare for ramming speed. Hayes looked at him in shock. Captain. That's the only option we have left, Reynolds finished. Wilson, do we have enough power for one more burst of speed? Wilson's voice came through, strained but determined. Yes, Captain, but the reactor won't survive it. None of us will if we don't try, Reynolds said quietly, then louder. Arm all remaining nuclear warheads. Set them for proximity detonation. The crew worked quickly, preparing for their final attack. The Defiance turned toward the third dreadnought, which was now moving to block the escape route of the civilian ships. All personnel secure for impact, Reynolds ordered. It's been an honor serving with you all. The Defiance surged forward one last time, aimed directly at the massive enemy vessel. The dreadnought's weapons fired continuously, tearing into the human ship's unprotected hull. Systems failed, sections decompressed, but still the Defiance came on. Within 5 seconds to impact, Hayes counted down, her voice steady despite everything. Detonate warheads, Reynolds commanded. The nuclear warheads exploded just as the Defiance struck the dreadnought. The combined force of the collision and the nuclear blast tore through both ships in a blinding flash of light and energy. When the radioactive dust settled, the dreadnought drifted in space, its once perfect form now a shattered wreck. The Defiance was barely recognizable. More than half of its structure was completely gone. But in the ship's central section, emergency systems maintained atmosphere in a few compartments. In one of those compartments, Captain Mark Reynolds opened his eyes to find Dr. Cooper standing over him with a medical scanner. "We're alive?" he asked in disbelief. "Some of us," Cooper replied grimly. "About half the crew made it. The dreadnoughts, 2 destroyed, 1 badly damaged and retreating." Cooper helped Reynolds sit up. "You did it, Captain. The evacuation ships got away, and you've done something no one has ever done before." "What's that?" Reynolds asked, wincing at the pain from his injuries. "You defeated the Nova judges, all 3 of them." As if on cue, the emergency communication system activated, a transmission from Earth Command appearing on the only functioning screen. "Defiance, this is Admiral West. We're receiving reports of your engagement, but we can hardly believe them. Please confirm. Did you actually defeat 3 Nova judges?" Reynolds looked around at what remained of his ship, at the surviving crew members who had accomplished the impossible. "This is Captain Reynolds," he replied. "Confirmed, 3 Nova judges defeated. The Defiance may be down, Admiral, but we're far from out." 2 weeks after the battle at New Terra, the HSS Defiance drifted silently near an abandoned mining outpost in the Arcturus system. The once proud warship looked like a half-eaten carcass. Entire sections were gone, exposed decks sealed with emergency force fields that glowed blue against the darkness of space. Inside the ship's makeshift medical bay, Captain Reynolds winced as Dr. Cooper removed a bandage from his arm. "The good news is you won't lose the arm," Cooper said, applying fresh medication to the burn. "The bad news is pretty much everything else." Reynolds glanced around at the injured crew members, filling every available space. "How many can return to duty?" "Maybe half," Cooper replied. "The rest need more treatment than we can provide here." Reynolds nodded grimly. "Half a crew on half a ship. Not great odds, but better than I'd expected after ramming a Crimson dreadnought." Lieutenant Parker appeared at the doorway, his normally cheerful face now serious. "Captain, you need to see this." Reynolds followed him down to what remained of the bridge. The main screen was patched together from salvaged parts, displaying a transmission from Earth Command. Admiral West's face appeared, lined with worry. "Captain Reynolds, this message is encoded at highest priority. Your victory at New Terra has had unexpected consequences." The image shifted to show news broadcasts from across human space, crowds celebrating, the Defiance's name painted on walls, people wearing homemade uniforms with the ship's insignia. "You've become a symbol," West continued. "The first humans to defeat Nova judges, morale across the colonies has skyrocketed, resistance movements are forming everywhere." Reynolds exchanged glances with Parker. "But the Crimson Imperium has responded." West's voice grew more urgent. "Their High Council of Judges has dispatched 7 dreadnoughts with orders to find and destroy the Defiance, not just as a military target, but as a symbol. They can't allow the myth of their invincibility to be challenged." The screen changed again, showing tactical data on Crimson fleet movements. "We're sending coordinates for a rendezvous with our remaining fleet. Make your way there as soon as possible." West signed off. Reynolds stared at the blank screen for a long moment. At least we're famous now, Parker said with a weak attempt at humor. Famous targets, Reynolds corrected. He turned as Hayes entered the bridge, her arm in a sling. Engine status, he asked. Wilson says we can manage half speed at best, Hayes reported. The reactor is stable, but that's about the only good news. Reynolds considered their options. 7 dreadnoughts hunting them, a half-dead ship, the nearest human fleet weeks away at their current speed. Gather the senior officers, he ordered. We need to talk. An hour later, the remaining officers sat around a table in what used to be the ship's mess hall. Reynolds looked at each face in turn. Hayes, his steady first officer. Parker, the weapons genius. Wilson, somehow keeping the reactor running with chewing gum and prayers. Cooper working miracles in the medical bay, and Reed's replacement, communications officer Ly Brown. We have 2 options, Reynolds began. Try to reach the fleet or go our own way. The fleet offers protection, Hayes pointed out. But we can't take on 7 dreadnoughts in our condition. We can't take on 1 dreadnought in our condition, Wilson added bluntly. Parker tapped the table nervously. But joining the fleet puts them at risk too. The judges are hunting us specifically. There's something else, Cooper said, placing a data pad on the table. I've been analyzing the sensor readings from our battle with the Nova judges. There's something strange in their response patterns. After we damaged the first dreadnought, she brought up a series of waveforms. See here, the other judges actually hesitated for 1.3 seconds as if they were processing what happened. So, Wilson asked. Nova judges don't hesitate, Cooper explained. They operate at quantum speeds. A 1.3-second delay is an eternity for them. Brown leaned forward, interested. What are you suggesting? I think they're connected somehow. A quantum network, Cooper said, highlighting sections of the data. When one judge encountered our tactics, the others had to process and adapt, but that adaptation created a vulnerability. Reynolds began to understand. A vulnerability we could exploit. Exactly, Cooper nodded. If we could defeat enough judges in rapid succession, it might create a cascading failure in their entire command structure. Silence fell over the room as everyone considered the implications. That's completely insane, Hayes finally said. We barely survived 3 judges and now you want to hunt more of them. Not hunt, Cooper clarified. Just observe, test my theory. Reynolds stood up and walked to a nearby viewport. The stars seemed different now, not colder but clearer somehow. The Nova judges are hunting us, he said quietly. They're expecting us to run, to hide, to seek protection with the fleet. He turned back to face his officers. What if we don't? What if instead we hunt them? With what? Wilson demanded. Half a ship, half a crew. With surprise, unpredictability, the very things that let us win at New Terra. The things the judges can't calculate. He brought up a star chart on the main display. There are reports of isolated Crimson ships at these locations. Smaller vessels, not the dreadnoughts hunting us. If Cooper is right about their network, each judge we defeat weakens their entire system. Brown studied the chart. We could use the mining outpost's comm array to monitor Crimson transmissions and identify vulnerable targets. Parker was already thinking ahead. I could reconfigure our remaining weapons to make them look weaker than they are, lure them into a false sense of security. This is suicide, Hayes stated flatly. No, Reynolds said. This is our best chance not just for survival but for victory. He looked around at his officers. I'm not ordering any of you to follow this plan. It's too dangerous. Anyone who wants to take a shuttle and try to reach the fleet can do so with my blessing. No one moved. We're with you, Captain, Hayes said after a moment, crazy as this plan was. A week later, the Defiance had transformed. Using materials from the mining outpost, the crew had patched the worst of the damage, but they'd done something else, something cunning. They'd made the ship look worse than it actually was. Fake debris hung from its hull. Harmless plasma leaks created the appearance of critical damage. In the Defiance's command center, the bridge was now too damaged to use. Reynolds reviewed the final preparations. Target identified, Brown reported. Crimson Light Cruiser designation Harbinger 1. Nova judge confirmed on board. They're investigating an abandoned research station in the Vega sector. Weapon status, Reynolds asked. Ready, Parker replied. They won't see us coming until it's too late. Reynolds nodded. Plot course for the Vega sector, let's go hunting. As the Defiance moved silently away from the mining outpost, news of its victory continued to spread across human space. Stories grew with each telling. How the ship had destroyed not 3 but 5 dreadnoughts. How Reynolds had challenged the Nova judges to personal combat. How the Defiance could appear and disappear at will. In the Crimson High Council chamber, the elite judges gathered, their perfect faces showing rare signs of concern. The human vessel defies probability, one stated. The human vessel defies calculation, another added. The human vessel must be destroyed, they concluded together. But for the first time in the long history of the Nova judges, there was uncertainty in their perfect minds. A human ship had done the impossible. What else might humans be capable of? As 7 dreadnoughts searched in vain for the Defiance, the damaged warship slipped through space toward its first chosen target. The hunters had become the hunted, and the legend of the Defiance was only beginning to grow. For 3 months, the HSS Defiance played a deadly game of cat and mouse across the stars. Sometimes they were the cat, sometimes they were the mouse. Today, they were both. Captain Reynolds studied the tactical display showing a crimson patrol vessel moving through the dust clouds of the Arcturus system. This would be their 5th engagement since implementing their hunt strategy. They haven't spotted us yet, Hayes reported from her station. The first officer looked thinner now, her uniform hanging loose on her frame like everyone aboard. She'd been pushed to her limits. Weapons ready, Parker confirmed, his once excited eyes now holding a steady, dangerous calm. 3 months of constant combat had changed him, changed them all. Engineering reports, reactor at 82% capacity, Wilson's voice came through the comm. That's the best we'll get. Reynolds nodded. Each victory against a Nova judge had proven Cooper's theory correct. The quantum network connecting them experienced disruptions with each defeat. And with each disruption, human resistance forces gained ground across the colonies. But the cost had been high. The Defiance now operated with a crew of just 38, barely enough to keep essential systems running. The ship itself was a patchwork of repairs and jury-rigged systems. They cannibalized parts from defeated Crimson vessels, giving the Defiance a strange hybrid appearance. Begin approach, Reynolds ordered. Standard ambush pattern. The ship moved silently through the dust cloud, its modified engines leaving almost no energy signature. Parker's newest weapon systems, partly built from Crimson technology, waited for the command to fire. Sir, Brown called from communications, I'm detecting unusual activity in Crimson transmissions. A massive energy surge erupted from behind a nearby asteroid. 3 Crimson warships appeared, weapons already firing. It's a trap, Hayes shouted. The Defiance rocked violently as the first volley struck its shields. Reynolds gripped his chair. Evasive maneuvers, return fire. The ship spun away from the attack, its engines screaming with strain. Parker fired the main weapons, striking one of the Crimson vessels, but the other 2 continued their pursuit. They predicted our attack pattern, Hayes said in disbelief. They're learning our tactics. Another blast hit the Defiance, this one breaching the shields. Alarms blared throughout the ship as hull integrity warnings flashed across multiple screens. We can't take another hit like that, Wilson reported from engineering, her voice almost drowned out by the sound of systems failing around her. Reynolds made a quick decision. Dump the emergency fuel cells, full detonation. Hayes looked at him in shock. Sir, that's half our reserve power. Do it. The Defiance released several fuel containers, which drifted toward the pursuing Crimson ships. When they were in position, Parker triggered the detonator. The explosion created a massive shock wave, temporarily blinding the Crimson sensors. Maximum burn, get us out of here, Reynolds ordered. The ship lurched forward, pushing through the debris field created by the explosion. For several tense minutes they fled at top speed until finally they reached the safety of a dense nebula. Damage report, Reynolds said, his voice hoarse from shouting orders. Bad, Hayes replied simply. Hull breaches on decks 2 and 4, life support at 60%, weapon systems overheated, casualties, 12 injured, 5 dead, including Brown. Reynolds closed his eyes briefly. Lai Brown had been an excellent communications officer, stepping up after Reed's death during their early battles. Now she was gone too. Captain, Parker called out urgently, Something's happening with the main computer. The screens throughout the command center flickered, then displayed a strange pattern of light and code. "What is that?" Reynolds asked. Before anyone could answer, the pattern resolved into a face they all recognized. "Nova Judge." "Human vessel Defiance," the judge spoke, its perfect voice filling the command center. "Your tactics have been analyzed. Your defeat is inevitable. The anomalies you have created in our network have been corrected." Reynolds stared at the screen, shocked that a Nova Judge had somehow infiltrated their systems. "How are you doing this?" he demanded. "Your communications officer transmitted a signal before her death," the judge replied without emotion. "A signal containing a virus of our design. You have been compromised." The screen returned to normal, but damage had been done. Systems throughout the ship began to fail as the Crimson virus spread, shutting down all non-essential systems. "Isolate the main computer," Reynolds ordered. The crew worked frantically to contain the damage, but the virus moved too quickly. In minutes, half the ship's systems were offline or malfunctioning. In engineering, Wilson fought a losing battle to keep the reactor stable. "Captain," she called through the emergency comm, "the reactor can't take much more. One more engagement and we're finished." Reynolds looked around at his exhausted crew. They had fought brilliantly, achieved the impossible multiple times, but now they had reached their breaking point. Parker approached him, speaking quietly. "Sir, maybe it's time to consider alternatives. We've done more than anyone expected. We could try to reach the human fleet, get these people to safety." For the first time since their mission began, Reynolds considered surrender, not to the Crimson forces, but to reality. His crew had given everything. Perhaps it was time to save what was left. Just then, Captain Cooper burst into the command center, her medical uniform stained with blood from treating the injured. "I need to show you something," she said.